Kremlin. Kremlin, which is fortress, and let me bring you back to the history of Moscow. When in the 12th century, Moscow prince, whose name was Yuri, came here from a small town near Moscow, and he liked the place very much because he was enchanted by beauty of the river. There were forests around, very nice area, and he decided to stay and settle here. And this is how Moscow was started, when he built a small settlement which had at that time a little less than 100 people. This was in the 12th century, and in 1147 he announced this place to be this city, and this is how Moscow was founded. 1147 is the year of its official foundation. But at that time Moscow, of course, was small, not so important. There were other cities in Russia, much more important than Moscow. But Moscow had very advantageous geographical position. It was located at crossroads leading from north to south and east to west, and very often it was visited by trade people, by merchants who were bringing goods here or taking goods from here. Anyway, it was growing so rapidly that by the 15th century it became a very important center. And it was decided after Russia, which originally consisted of scattered principalities, all these principalities were united into one state, and Moscow became the capital, and this was in the 15th century. And in this time, since rulers lived in the Kremlin, they decided to build a new Kremlin. And the man who decided to do this, his name was Ivan. We have altogether in Russian history 7 Ivans who ruled in Russia. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. But very distinguished ones were Ivan number 3, whose nickname was Great. Did you notice that all Russian rulers had nicknames? And Ivan number 4, whose nickname was the Terrible. So Ivan number 3, the Great, lived in the 15th century, and it was him who started the construction of New Kremlin. And it was quite an interesting fact, because Ivan the Great never planned to do this. He was quite satisfied with what he had around. He lived in the Kremlin, surrounded by the wall. There were palaces there where he lived. But then he married a very young and beautiful girl. She was not from Russia, she was from Byzantium. And remember, I told you that in the 10th century, Russia adopted Christianity, and we have chosen Eastern form of Greek Christianity. In other words, religion came from there, from Byzantium. And for Ivan the Great, it was very important to marry a princess from there. So she came to Russia, she saw the Kremlin. She didn't like it at all, because she got used to luxurious life there, and all of a sudden she saw dilapidating Kremlin, and she said to her husband, "I'm not going to stay here. I don't like the place." And since he was a good husband, he immediately started the reconstruction of New Kremlin, and he invited for the purpose a group of Italian architects. And you may ask me, why Italian? Couldn't Russia do this? Yes, of course, Russian people could do this, but Italian architects were most famous in the world, and they invited best of the best, such as Aristotle Fioravanti, Alevisio Novi, and others, and they started the construction. The Kremlin walls were built at the very end of the 15th century. You saw them partially on the side, from the side of Red Square. You saw the tower with the clock. All this was built by Italians in the 15th century. And Ivan the Great continued the construction. By the way, he donated a lot of money for construction of all these buildings, and he started with construction of churches. And he built famous church, which I'm going to show you later. It is called the Assumption or Domitian Church on the territory of the Kremlin. And this is how Moscow was started as the capital of Russia. And Moscow remained to be the capital until the year of 1703, beginning of the 18th century, when St. Petersburg was constructed. And later, St. Petersburg became the capital of Russia and remained to be the capital until 1918, when Comrade Lenin, or Mr. Lenin, moved the capital back to Moscow from St. Petersburg, and he himself came to live and work in Moscow from St. Petersburg. So he was the first leader who settled down, Soviet leader, who settled down in the Kremlin. He lived there with his small family. His family consisted of 2 people only, Lenin himself and his wife, and all his life until he left the Kremlin, Lenin lived, the rest of his life, he lived and worked in the Kremlin. Later, his successor, Joseph Stalin, also lived in the Kremlin, and he at that time was in charge of the whole country. He was unprecedentedly powerful man, and he ruled in Russia practically like a Tsar, though his official title was different, but it was Soviet time, and he was in charge of the country as president of the country, but though he didn't have this particular title because it was the Soviet Union, and actually he was in charge of the party. So Stalin was in power from end of the 20s until March 1953, and he also lived in the Kremlin. I will show you the building where he lived. But after death of Stalin, 1953, by the way, during his time, the Kremlin was closed to the public. Nobody could get in, and museums of the Kremlin, which are open to the public today, they were closed. After his death, he was succeeded by Nikita Khrushchev, another famous communist leader, who opened the Kremlin for the people, for the public, and today it is functioning as a museum, and its numerous palaces and churches are open to the people. So you can admire the architecture and the interior of these places. We are going to be in the Kremlin for 2 hours approximately, a little more. And I will take you first through the Kremlin grounds. You will see some buildings outside. We shall pass by administrative area, office of the president, some interesting administrative buildings, and then we shall proceed to the Armory Museum, where we shall have the inside visit with some wonderful collections from all the times, such as collection of Tsar's regalia, collection of ambassadorial gifts from different countries. Of course, we are talking about the Tsarist Russia, which was part of history before revolution, 1917. You'll see wonderful dresses, coronation and for wedding of royalty. You will see wonderful collection of thrones, and the museum is proud of famous collection called Fabergé, Imperial eggs or Easter eggs. You might have heard about them. That was private collection of the royal family, which was started in the 19th century, and which had quite a number of wonderfully beautiful jewelry, and specifically imperial eggs, which were made for Easter. So this will be our plan. We go to the museum inside. It will be a walking tour again. When we are in the Kremlin, of course, you would want to take pictures. You are mostly welcome, but only when we are outside the buildings. When we go visit the church inside and then Armory Museum, please, pictures are not allowed inside, but you can have your cameras. Keep your cameras. So now we made again around, actually we are not far from Red Square, and it's always a traffic jam here. We are aiming at the embankment side. In a few minutes we shall be by the embankment side, and we shall be closer to the Kremlin gate from where we enter the Kremlin.